A estas alturas somos todos muy conscientes de hasta qué punto tomar la decisión de eutanasiar a nuestro animal de compañía a causa de problemas de conducta y de problemas de salud mental es una decisión dura y compleja. Pero si a esta dureza y a esta complejidad le añadimos además el factor de la incomprensión y del juicio externo, está claro que hay que hacer algo al respecto. Afortunadamente se ha hecho. En su paso por nuestro programa Diálogos INMAB de Conciencia, ya sabéis, podéis verlo en cuanto queráis, la entrenadora canadiense Sue Alexander, experta en comportamiento y conducta canina y certificada de hecho en problemas de comportamiento, no solo nos habló y nos explicó todo lo referente a precisamente los problemas de conducta, sino que además fue muy honesta y muy clara, cosa que agradecemos, a la hora de explicarnos esas consecuencias que el juicio externo tiene sobre los tutores que han tenido que tomar una decisión que ni ha sido buscada ni premeditada, y nos presentó y nos dio a conocer y nos explicó muchísimo de un grupo formado por ella llamado Losing Lulu, que precisamente es una comunidad en la que cualquier tutor o cualquier familia que ha tenido que eutanasiar a su animal de compañía por esos problemas de conducta y de salud mental pueden unirse a él para sentirse acompañados, para poder compartir su dolor, sus sentimientos y sus emociones, y sobre todo sentirse cuidados y acompañados desde el respeto y desde, sobre todo, y lo subrayo porque ella lo subrayó muchísimo, la máxima compasión. Así que lo mejor que puedo hacer yo es callarme y pasar directamente al vídeo de la entrevista, porque sin duda es una entrevista muy interesante de la que podemos sacar mucho. Estarán los enlaces en la descripción del vídeo por si cualquier persona pasa por esta situación y necesita unirse o conectar con el grupo de Losing Lulu. Y con esto lo único que puedo decir es disfrutar y que aprendamos todos mucho gracias a Sue Alexander y sobre todo a esa honestidad y claridad a la hora de hablarnos de estas cosas. Dentro vídeo.
In 2018, my friend Trish McMillan had a foster dog that she was taking care of. And her foster dog's name was Lulu, and Lulu attacked and almost killed another dog. And they couldn't rehome that dog. It wasn't ethical to rehome that dog, because if they rehomed her, she was probably going to try and kill another dog. So rather than pass the problem along and pass it along, they decided to euthanize her due to behavior. And of course, being very famous, Trish had a lot of contacts online, and she had said, this happened. Most of her professional behavior colleagues said, well, this is a reasonable thing to do. You can't have one dog who is killing another dog and then send it off to live in a home where there's going to be next door neighbor dogs and there's going to be dogs who walk by on the street, because then we're just going to end up with a whole lot of trauma, a whole lot of dangerous attacks, and a whole lot of tragedy. So the rescue that owned Lulu agreed and they euthanized her. But the public did not agree. And it was actually, there were some funny moments, because Trish got a lot of comments on her social media from people who didn't know her very well, where they said things like, why didn't you hire a trainer? Well, Trish is an expert, an international expert in aggression. She is a trainer. If she can't solve the problem, nobody's going to be able to solve the problem. And, people said things that were really, truly unkind. They said things like, if you can't take care of a dog like Lulu, you don't deserve to live. And so they were making an equation of her inability to resolve this dog's problems, that somehow or another she was a bad person. And they were saying things that were truly, truly unkind. And so what happened was, on her personal wall, on her personal social media, the trainers were talking about this, and we were all saying, yeah, it's happened to me too. I've had to euthanize a dog. And the public doesn't understand it. I have had Reddit threads that say, all Sue Alexander wants to do is kill dogs. And that's not true. That's not at all true. But what I don't want to have are dangerous dogs out there who could kill another dog or a human being, who could injure somebody, maybe take out a child. I don't think that that's appropriate. And I don't think that that's what our relationship with dogs should be all about. And so what happens is, because there's this misunderstanding between the general public and the professionals who have to work with these dangerous animals, then we get a lot of clashes. And everybody was saying, we need a support group. We need a support group to help when a behavioral euthanasia happens, so that when people say to us, you were wrong, we can have someone who says, I know people are saying that, but it's not true. And I know that you really loved your animal companion or friend. And we needed a place for that to be. And originally it was just trainers. It wasn't anybody else. It was just professional trainers. But very, very quickly, it became pet owners. And right now we are at about 31,000 members. So 31,000 people have been touched by behavioral euthanasia. And when I say touched by behavioral euthanasia, what I mean is, you may have been a family member whose family pet was dangerous or had a profound behavior problem, and you may have directly had a loss. You could be a veterinarian who had a lovely, say, cat who had impossible house training issues, and who was, maybe 3 or 4 years old. You had done all of the diagnostics that you could. You had tried medication, and this cat was still so distressed that they were toileting all through the house. And, you tried having the cat live on a farm, but the cat had substate preferences, and whenever it could, it would do things like urinate or defecate on the chairs in the barn. And that happens. And sometimes the answer is, this animal is behaviorally unhealthy and we have to euthanize. You could be a trainer who had a client and you were trying to help them. Maybe you're a horse trainer and you had a client whose horse was truly dangerous. And I had a horse that we had to euthanize because although she wasn't unkind, she was very, very dangerous. And so we weren't able to help her and we had to euthanize her. But maybe that was, my trainer could be part of our group, because she cried when Kayak died too. It is about supporting anyone who has suffered a loss and who needs help. And we're international. You will occasionally see posts in other languages. We've had posts in English, French, and Spanish. But if somebody needed to make a post in Russian, I would find a translation of what they had to say. If somebody had a post in Japanese or Korean, I would find a way to translate it and make sure that people could access it, because it crosses all kinds of boundaries. It's not just language boundaries. It's not just culture. It's not just geography. Because when we choose to include animals in our lives, we have to find a way to make this work for the animals and for the people. And when it is not working, sometimes we're faced with decisions that have to be made in the interest of the animal's welfare. And what I want everybody to understand about behavioral euthanasia is, this is not a convenience. This isn't something that happens because, I didn't feel like feeding the dog. Or, it was inconvenient to have to exercise my dog. It is always inconvenient to do something with an animal in our life. It may be inconvenient to groom them. It may be inconvenient to have to go to the veterinarian's office. That is not why we euthanize animals. An animal who is not behaving normally within our homes and our lives does not have good welfare. And so, from my perspective, when we talk about behavioral euthanasia, we're talking about an act of love. We're talking about releasing an animal from its suffering. So if you have a cat and you live, in the city, and that cat is scratching everybody who comes in your home and attacking their feet or attacking their legs, that's not normal. And that's not a good quality of life, because it means that every time that somebody comes in, the cat feels that they are at so much risk that they have to defend themselves. So when the cat owner comes to the trainer or the cat behavior consultant or the veterinarian or even a psychologist and says, I can't live with this animal, we need to understand that they are not saying that because they don't love the animal. They're saying that because they do love the animal. And we have to make room to talk about this in a rational and thoughtful way. But we also have to take into account the welfare of the families, the welfare of the community, the ability of the families. I worked with one lady, very lovely lady, very good trainer, but she was in a wheelchair and she was unable to get her dog enough exercise, and the dog became frustrated and dangerous. And it's easy to say, oh, yeah, but it's our fault because we should have known that this dog needed more exercise. But by the time that I came on the scene, the dog had a laundry list of aggressive incidences, and the owner was unable to help. I took that dog in for 2 weeks of training. We did not make any reasonable progress. The dog never got to the point where she was able to tolerate me handling her. Never mind tolerate having people coming and going. So we can point to something and say, oh, yeah, well, the owner should have known and it's the owner's fault. And we can get all upset about that. But the fact of the matter is once the damage is done in a dog like that, we have to accept that we may not be able to fix it. What I want any trainers who are new to aggression, new to behavior to know is it is not a simple scale. It is not, nowhere is anybody going to teach you this is the absolute answer, because there's always going to be the exception.
So this is when the losing Lulu, I guess, when you don't have any more options with your clients and patients, that's when losing Lulu comes into
Absolutely.
people's mind, I guess. So you mentioned a little bit about the support that people get, that it's a grieving experience for them, it's a safe place, right? So there are also a lot of rules in Losing Lulu. You guys
There are.
monitor a lot the comments. So why is that?
Okay, so here is the thing. This is an incredibly sensitive topic. So when you come to Losing Lulu, you can only post about your experience of grief. So you can post and say, I lost a dog to a behavior problem 7 years ago, and I am still grieving, and I'm still struggling, and I'm still suffering. And people may write in and say, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm, so on. We will not let somebody write in and say, well, come on, it's been 7 years, get over yourself, because that's not appropriate. So we have to have rules to help people to understand what our culture is and what it's all about. Our culture is about helping people who are grieving. That's it. That's our whole culture. Okay? We cannot say, well, you shouldn't have euthanized that animal, because that doesn't help. The person who's sad, they already feel like they shouldn't have done it. They already feel badly. And they're missing their animal and saying, well, you shouldn't have done that. That is not going to be helpful. We don't let people post and say, I have a bunny who is being very, very aggressive to my children, and I can't send this bunny to anybody else, and he's too dangerous to live with, and I don't know what to do. because that's not what we're about. That is not about grief. That is about decision making. So we're very, very clear about that.
Mm-hmm.
We do not allow any naming, blaming, or shaming. So we would not, for instance, say, oh, well, I took my dog to ABC Vet Clinic and they did a terrible job. And I think, ABC Vet Clinic should be taken out of business and they're horrible people. We don't let that happen. And we don't even let it happen a little bit. So you can say, I had a bad experience with a trainer or I had a bad experience with a vet, but you cannot say who. You can say, I am angry about the service that I got at the veterinary clinic, but you cannot say that person is a terrible human being. So we don't name, we don't blame, and we don't shame. We don't say, well, I think so-and-so should be so ashamed of himself because he euthanized his cat. We just don't let it happen because that is not grief support. And I sometimes think that we just need to be really, really clear that grief support is about the person who is grieving. It's about the person who is sad. And if you're sitting in your office talking to somebody who is grieving, you don't say to them, well, it's too bad your mom died, but she wasn't very nice. That's a horrible way to be. You have to say, gosh, I know you and your mom had a troubled relationship, but she was your mom. And I'm so sorry she's not with you anymore. And it doesn't matter how you feel about, the person's mom. You don't say nasty things about the dead person because it doesn't help the living person. And the same is true in Losing Lulu. You don't say anything like, oh, that breed is a terrible breed and they bite everybody, because that isn't going to help. And so our motto is keep it kind. You just have to be kind. It's not that hard. Maybe I think that you did the wrong thing. Maybe I thought you could have done something different, but you can't do anything different once the animal is no longer alive. So, there doesn't do any good to explore that. We allow people to post expressions of their faith. So sometimes people will say, I feel betrayed by God, or I know that my dog is in the arms of the Lord. That's fine. We do not allow people to say, and you should believe in this church, because that's not appropriate for grief. That doesn't help the grieving person. That just confuses them. We don't allow anybody to post that, well, you should go and speak to this specific person because they're perfect. If you have used a memorial service, we do allow you to post links to that. So let's say that you got a really pretty urn for your animal friend's cremains, and you want to share the website where you got that, that's totally fine. Or if you got a portrait done of your animal companion and you want to say, this artist did such a beautiful job, and we will allow that. So there are a lot of rules. They are posted. There are 10 of them. And one of them is the moderators reserve the right to moderate, because sometimes something comes up that we go, oh, well, we never faced that before, but we're not allowing that to happen. The one that cracks me up is the people who, they know that the list is moderated. So when you put up a post, it's moderated. And the ones that always make me laugh are the ones who post, I don't like how this list is being moderated. And I'm like, well, I'm the moderator. You think I'm going to put that through? No, I'm not putting that through.
That's hilarious.
It is hilarious. It's like people don't think about this. We also read the list deeply every single day. So we have about 20 people who are reading the list, and in the event that something is going wrong, then they read that, and they're able to make that happen. And it's kind of cool that, we've got that all being moderated and read, and we've got 20 people, and we have the best moderation team in the world. And, then what we do is they're able to remove comments that are bad or comments that break the rules. but we also will read every single post before it goes up. And we usually approve about between 110 and 150 posts a week. So it's a busy list. And, for anybody who is touched by behavioral euthanasia, if that's a list where you want to go, I would love to have you on our list. And what you can do that's very helpful is make sure that you get on every day and say something kind to somebody. There have been people who have posted breeds that I would never have, and I never will have, and I don't like them. Okay, and I won't tell you what they are, but there have been dogs of that breed on, and I will post something kind, because being kind and sincere helps. And being, unfailingly honest can be very hurtful. If I say, oh, well, I would never have a Swedish gutter hound, which is a made-up breed, that's not helping the person who loves Swedish gutter hounds. It doesn't help. And you got to ask yourself at the end of the day, if you're not being helpful, why are you here?
That's right. So that's something that, like, what it's very important, because it's what is expected from users, right? But also what can they get from the group? What would you highlight from the list that they can get?
An awful lot of people who get on the list and they say, I can't tell you the number of posts where they say, I had a behavioral euthanasia 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and I thought I was the only one. And one of the saddest ones was a lady who was in her 80s who posted, and she said, when I was a little girl, my dog bit my sister and my father shot him. And I always felt like it was my fault because I didn't tie the dog up. That's 70 years of guilt and grief. Wow. And when I said, look, you were a little girl and you would never expect your grandchildren to be solely responsible for the life of another animal, she said, nobody's ever said that to me. 70 years. People carry this grief for a long time and they feel very isolated. People say things like, I know my dog did terrible things, or I know my cat did terrible things, and this is the only place where I can share how much I loved him. And imagine that. Imagine if this was, we've all experienced loss in our human families. So my grandfather died. Imagine if I had nowhere where I could say, I remember driving in the car when I was a little girl with my grandpa, and he had a special booster seat so that I could see out the window. And it was really special for me to go in my grandpa's car because nobody else had a booster seat like that. Imagine if I couldn't say that without somebody saying, well, I don't want to hear about your grandpa. He was mean. That would be awful. That would be horrible. But that is exactly what happens when we have a dog with a behavior problem. The dog has bitten a child. We're terribly upset about the child being bitten. We choose to euthanize. And somebody at work says, well, I don't see why you're grieving. That was a terrible dog. We never would say that about a human loss, no matter how difficult the relationship might have been. And so for a lot of people, they have a euthanasia and they just don't tell anybody. And eventually somebody says, oh, how's Fluffy? And then you're faced with, oh, well, I don't have him anymore. And people then start pushing, what happened? And you're not feeling comfortable enough to speak about it in case somebody says something like, well, I don't know why you're upset. And that happens all the time. So I'd say the most important thing that we do for people is we give them community. And I think we are creating a community of acceptance, but we're also creating a conversation. If you think back 10 years ago, Nobody was talking about behavioral euthanasia at conferences, in public. There were no workshops on it. We were the first, and we're still the biggest group that's addressing behavioral euthanasia. And so what I think is that we've opened up the possibility of discussing behavioral euthanasia as a way of humanely addressing a problem. And I think when we compare this to other kinds of euthanasia, so if we compare euthanasia for a dog with cancer, we had a dog who died of cancer about 2 years ago. Imagine if the veterinarian said, well, you're not trying hard enough because your dog still has cancer after 4 years. Imagine if what it would be like if the veterinarians could not talk at their conferences about quality of life for dogs with cancer. Imagine how we would do our jobs. We couldn't do our jobs. And I think what has happened is, because you cannot see the brain doing its job, because you cannot see emotions, people don't want to talk about it. And I think what's happened is we have brought that out into the light. And what I think is truly amazing is I founded this organization, and now sometimes I'll go to a conference and somebody will say, have you heard about Losing Lulu? I go, yeah, I know it. Oh, you should join. I'm like, yeah, I'm a member. Oh, it's great, it's really wonderful. And yeah, it is. And people say, it's made such a difference in my life. And I say, I'm really glad. And I actually had one person who said, you seem to be taking a personal responsibility for this. And I said, well, that's because I founded it. Yes, I'm taking personal responsibility for that. And I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the people who joined it. I'm proud of the bravery that people had to start talking about this, because 20 years ago, I was at a behavior conference and they said, what else should we be talking about? And I said, we should be talking about behavioral euthanasia. And the room went silent, and it was like, no, we can't talk about that. I'm proud that I brought that out, and that with Trish's help to get people to know about it, with the help of our moderation team. Deb Jones was someone who helped us early on. It's been possible to talk about something that was a dark and horrible secret. And, think about that lady who suffered for 70 years. 70 years. She thought she was solely responsible for the death of a dog, and it was not her fault. And she thought she was the only one. And we're going to fix that. And I got to tell you, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It's something that I talk about frequently. And I think that, when we're talking about behavior problems, if we don't talk about that as one of the possible outcomes, as professionals, we're not doing our job. Nobody wants that outcome. But I can tell you, when I talk to my veterinary colleagues, if they have a dog who's got a really bad infection, maybe they've got a dog who's got an infection that is resistant to antibiotics, and they try and they try and they try. The veterinarians are sad when that dog dies, but they also accept that that is a part of medicine. And I think that we need to be very much like that with behavior. We need that as a part of behavior. We need to understand that behavior may have a tragic outcome. We can do a lot that we didn't used to be able to do. I mean, the science of training has come so far, and we are able to do so many things that 10 years ago we weren't doing. And, I love seeing all of the different skills that are being taught, all of the different ideas that are out there in the training world. But once in a while, and not often, about 6% of my cases end up in behavioral euthanasia, and it's been consistent over the last 20 years. So out of every 100 cases, 6 of them die. Usually those are cases that came to me after they had been not treated for a long time. But, you know, if you know that, and you don't talk about it, and you don't talk about when, and you don't talk about how, and it's something that you know is happening, but you don't talk about it, it festers, and it doesn't get better. And so I'm really glad that we can now talk about it, and that we can be open about it. You know, there are an awful lot of people who still won't tell me what their percentage of behavioral euthanasias are. And if you're doing actual behavior with actual behavior problems, that is going to be the outcome some of the time. You know, and it's not always pleasant, but it is a fact of what we do. And we can help an awful lot of dogs, but we can't help 100% of them. I was totally surprised at how many people, if you consider that we've only been going since 2018 and it's now 2024, that's only 6 years. That's not that long for 31,000 people. Losing Lulu is all about grief support.